Good evening, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. It is 6:13 p.m. Pursuant to state law, we have until 15 minutes after the meeting has been scheduled to actually start the thing, so we are within that time frame. We are at July 20th, 2023. I am Mike Capuano. I am the chairman of the planning board. So with me tonight are a quorum of the planning board, and what we have before us tonight are a number of items on our agenda. Before we start, pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. An audio recording of these proceedings will be available by using the registration link at the top of the agenda. What we have on ours is 620 Broadway, 16 and 20 Medford Street times 2 for two different agenda items. One is P&Z 23-011. One is P&Z 23-012. One is 316 Broadway. Next is 32-40-44 White Street. So those are what are formally on the agenda this evening. And what I'd like to do right now is take the 32-40-44 White Street applicant. They have requested a withdrawal without prejudice. I don't know if anybody is present for the applicant at this time, but I would like to welcome them if someone is there to be able to discuss the continuance. Otherwise, the planning board is ready, willing, and able to move forward on that.
This is Rice speaking. Adam Dash has his hand raised, and I believe he is the speaker for this case tonight.
Okay.
Adam, you have been unmuted.
Thank you, Raisa. Adam Dash, 48 Grove Street in Somerville. Represent the applicant SGL Development, Inc. And we hereby request to withdraw the application for 32-44 White Street without prejudice.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Does anybody else have any conversation or discussion or questions about the request for the continuance? Seeing none, the chair moves to accept the applicant's request for the withdrawal without prejudice. Seconded by Amelia. Rice, can you call the roll, please?
This is Rice speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Okay. We have a unanimous vote for continuance or withdrawal rather for that item. So I want to thank the applicant for their application and we welcome them back at another time. The next item on the agenda that I'd like to take up out of order is 16 and 20, 620 Broadway.
Chair, if I may, one quick question.
Yes.
Point of order on the White Street case. Do we need to do anything to read them into the record since they are a new case?
We will when we take them up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
For sure. So for 620, what I'd like to do is invite Emily Hutchings, who I think is on staff and present, to be able to discuss. Otherwise, Raisa, please advise me to the appropriate person.
Mr. Chair, this is Emily Hutchings. I'm glad to discuss as the board would like. I know the attorney for this project, Bill Proya, is also present.
I appreciate
May speak.
So Emily, before I recognize Attorney Pryor, can I ask you for an overview of where this case stands procedurally, both with the planning board and with other boards and departments within the city?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you. So this application went through the Zoning Board of Appeals to receive a hardship variance. Previously, they then, as they were completing the site plan approval application process, applied for and received a 6-month extension to their hardship variance. In May, that extension would have expired in June, this past June. They did apply for a second extension to that hardship variance in May, and they were informed that it is Planning and Zoning Departments and ISD's opinion that only one 6-month extension is permitted for a hardship variance. So no final determination has been provided on that, and the applicant did submit an application prior to the expiration of the extension of the hardship variance, so prior to the expiration of the hardship variance. But they're before the planning board this evening for site plan approval that is compliant based on that hardship variance.
Emily, can I ask you, I understand that the question is currently before other departments in the city. The hardship variance is something that we have not yet determined as a municipality is still valid. Is that still correct?
That is correct. It is, again, it's ISD and PPZ's opinion that the applicant needs to go return for a separate hardship variance. However, the applicant could make the argument that they have exercised their rights under this hardship, the existing hardship variance. So it's, again, no final determination has been requested or made.
I understand that question. I understand that the attorney for the applicant is present. I understand that there is a question. It's a legal question as to whether or not the variance is effectively, for the purpose of the planning board, still valid. So my concern in moving forward on this application at this time, Emily and my fellow colleagues, is that there is a request before the city of Somerville as to whether or not this variance is still valid. And it is my opinion as one member that any discussion on an application for which basically a condition proceeding, which is a variance by which they can make the application that they did, is valid. I'm not of the opinion the planning board should take any more testimony on this particular application until a determination on whether it's appropriately before the planning board has been made. That does not color my opinion on the validity of the application or anything. But I am concerned about the planning board moving forward before a determination is made by our law department and by ISD and the other appropriate divisions as to whether this application is appropriately before the planning board. So that's where I am here. I don't know if anybody has any conversation or questions or points of order on this particular issue, but I would love to hear you now if you do have them. Okay. Do we have, and I don't necessarily see a request, and please, Raisa, tell me if I'm wrong. Do we have a request for any discussion by the applicant or a representative of the applicant for this particular project?
This is Raisa speaking. Bill Proea is here and has his hand raised.
Okay,
I can unmute him if you like.
please do.
Bill, you have been unmuted. You may be self-muted on your end.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Raisa. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for letting me speak. I followed your conversation carefully. I understand your point of view. I would just like to say for the record that, and I think Emily described it very well, we do think there's a strong case that this variance has been exercised or told because of the actions we've been taking, not least of which is being before the board. So just for the record, but I think what I'm hearing is that the board at this point would prefer not to move forward with any substantive discussion on any of the other matters until there's a final determination on that question. Did I get that right?
Attorney Pryor, I can speak only as to myself.
Right.
That's my position, is that the board should hold off to hear whether pursuant to our law department and our ISD, if your application is still valid for discussion by and between members of the planning board. I certainly welcome that discussion if either the ISD or the law department wishes to address the planning board on that matter. But at this point, it is my opinion as one person that I want to see what happens. I want to make sure that we have an application that is still valid, that is still right for the planning board to adjudicate.
Very good. Appreciate that response, Mr. Chair. So I presume we'll hear from other members. The discussion will go on, so I will just mute myself and listen. Thank you.
Certainly, sir. Are there any other items of discussion or questions by members of the planning board on this? I see Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am trying my hardest to track the particulars here. And I guess partially what I'm confused by it is just, and maybe through you to Ms. Hutchings, maybe she can speak to this, is just tracking how concerned the city is about moving forward or not. And now maybe the city is not one entity, so maybe there are, different perspectives from different corners of the city. But I just would love to hear a little bit more. I guess I just need more hand-holding, because what's on my mind is big picture. I feel like we've heard a lot of support for this project, and at the last time it was taken up, we asked for an additional neighborhood meeting before we'd consider it further, and I am just worried about slowing it all the more. And a decision to slow it all the more, in my mind, seems like it just needs to hinge on how real the procedural risks are of getting this wrong right now, and that's the piece I just am struggling with. So I don't know if any further shedding of light from city staff would be helpful, if that's at all possible.
Luke, I'm sorry, did you say another neighborhood meeting?
Yeah.
I think you may be referencing the other case that is before us tonight. I think we're currently on 620 Broadway, which is.
Thank you.
Issue.
You're absolutely right. I thought we were taking them out of order, but I lost track of that. So thank you. Yep.
Thank you for the clarification. Luke, do you kind of withdraw the question of this particular applicant at this time and reserve your right to raise it to a future applicant? Sure. Does anybody else, thank you very much for the clarification on the questions that were raised here tonight. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on this particular applicant at this particular time as they work through? I see Erin's hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, for 620 here, I think I might be in the same mental space as Luke. This is not my area of expertise. And trying to follow the argument, or not the argument, but the rationale for the city and fully understanding the risks. I think where my head is I, kind of appreciate the sort of expertise from the city and expertise from other board members where this is their sort of professional experience, and am comfortable, sort of going with that recommendation and that experience, given that I don't want to basically, I guess my head is at, I don't want to overstep and then make a decision that is not valid and then have the applicant go all the way over to the beginning or something like that again. So that's kind of where my head is at, and I'm sort of deferring to the experts in the field on this particular matter, on whether or not we should, proceed or not proceed or take any further discussion. So that's my entire comment. I see Emily has her hand up, so I'll stop talking.
Erin, I'm happy to respond, but I would actually prefer for Emily to, if she would like to as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ms. Gino and Mr. Schuster, I think they're excellent questions. It's a matter of process. The city doesn't, or I should say staff does not necessarily have any concerns about action one way or the other. We are providing guidance on actions that could be taken. The planning board could potentially approve the site plan approval and special permit, and it would not be able to receive a building permit without the hardship variance. And if they didn't end up getting the hardship variance, or if they submitted a building permit for something other than what was approved by the planning board with or without that hardship variance, it wouldn't be able to be granted by the building department. However, the planning board does have the ability to request a continuance or to say that we would like to wait and see what the hardship, if the applicant, how the matter of the hardship variance turns out regarding a determination by ISD, whether they need a new hardship variance, and how that process turns out before they make it, the planning board makes a decision.
Emily, I want to thank you for that clarification that you made on the options that were before the planning board. It was my opinion as one member not to seek approval of any permits with conditions or deny any permits at this point. It was my inclination, based on where we stand with potential permits that may or may not be granted by the city or may not still be in legal effect, to continue this matter for further discussion to see where the law department and where ISD and the other relevant departments come out on the question of whether the variance is still valid. I don't, again, as one member, think it's appropriate for us to move forward until we receive that information. And that's why I was suggesting a few minutes earlier that we move to continue this application pending the determination by the city's attorneys and by the other relevant departments. That's the only thing I'll add to what Emily said, which I think was incredibly eloquent and well spoken and well reasoned. But I will also listen to my fellow members as to where we think we ought to go. My consideration on this, and I don't know if anybody else wants to speak on this. I didn't see anyone else's hand, but I will ask for anyone else's opinion right now. I see
This is Raisa speaking. I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to let the board know that Vice Chair Amelia Aboff is having technical issues and will be returning shortly.
Okay, but at this point, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the board who are still here, who are still a quorum. So the planning board may proceed on, up to and including when Vice Chair Amelia Aboff returns. I did see Debbie Howard Easton's hand. I'd like to recognize her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a question. I think there was going to be some new information being presented by the applicant, and I just wanted to clarify if that then would open up additional public comment tonight. Because
So
I guess my thought, I would agree with you that I would not be inclined to take a vote tonight with that other issue open on the whether the variance is still going to be valid, but to the extent there was going to be additional public testimony taken and members of the public came to attend this evening with that in mind, I'd be inclined to hear the new testimony and hear public comment on that, but not necessarily vote tonight.
sure. So Debbie, if I could give my opinion on the very issue that you raised, because it's something that I thought about too, is I'm, as one member, not inclined to take additional testimony at this time until we've determined whether the planning board may actually have the opportunity to vote on this application if the variance has been determined to still be valid. I think it is not the best use of the planning board and the public's time to take testimony on issues that may be determined to have never been properly before the board if the variance has been determined to no longer be valid. So my thought on your consideration, which is something that I thought about as well, is we have the information that is ready to be presented to the board, but I would like it to be presented to the board at such time where we have been told that we actually have the authority to vote on some of these issues. I don't want to jump the gun on taking testimony and making deliberations on an issue that might be determined that we no longer had the authority to hear or to vote on. Let's see.
Mr. Chair. I just want to note I've had a technical issue, but have rejoined the meeting.
Thank you, Amelia, very much. I'm certain for the next time that we bring this up, you will be able to talk about the 30 seconds that you're missing. I did see Aaron's hand, and then I think I also saw Jahan's hand, but I think I saw Aaron's hand first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe thank you for your explanation, and Emily also for your explanation. I think it kind of helps me think about it, where the planning board taking appropriate action when we can actually, know for certain that we can take action that's valid by votes or hearing public testimony or whatever. As far as I can consider it, it doesn't necessarily slow down construction, since the applicant wouldn't be able to receive a building permit until that issue of the validity of the hardship would be resolved anyway. So that sort of limits at least one of the concerns that I'm thinking. And I think, Debbie, like to the point that you brought up, and Mr. Chair, this sort of same point, I would agree of taking testimony as close to the vote as possible, because then it's maybe more clear for the public. And I mean, certainly if I were a member attending, I can imagine being in a situation of like, oh, we have this thing up for a vote, we're not taking testimony right now because we took testimony weeks and weeks ago, and then it feels very pro forma and not very open. So I think I agree with my fellow board members, and at least, you know, up until now, all the opinions that have been spoken, and would, you know, second sort of or not formally second, but would be in favor of a continuance. So thank you. Thank you everyone for your discussion. It's been very helpful for me.
Thank you, Erin. I think I did see someone else's hand raised, but I want to make sure that I either didn't miss it or I see John's hand now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to also mention, similar to Vice Chair Aboff, I'm also experiencing a little bit of internet lag difficulty, so I apologize both to my fellow board members and the audience if the audio is off or there's some issues, some technical issues that emerge. Having said that, Mr. Chair, I am broadly in agreement with your position. However, through you, Mr. Chair, I do want to get a better understanding of timeframes with respect to the hardship variance determination, and for that I would certainly like to hear Ms. Hutchings' thoughts about the timing. And the reason why I'm requesting this additional information is because if we are to, let's say, move forward with a continuance, when would be a reasonable time to bring this matter up again? Would it be our next meeting on August 3rd, August 17th, or sometime later on?
This is Emily Hutchings through you, Mr. Chair. May I answer that question? So thank you. I think the answer is it depends on the determination and the action that is taken. So the determination by ISD is fairly quick on a turnaround. If it's a determination that the hardship variance has not been exercised, that determination can be appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals, in which case it would have to be advertised. There would have to be legal advertisement and a public hearing to review that. If the applicant does not want to appeal that decision and simply goes before the Zoning Board of Appeals to get a new hardship variance, again, that is also a situation where there would need to be a new public hearing scheduled, and the proper process would need to be followed for a pre-submittal meeting and legal advertisement in the hearing. So I think the answer to your question is probably at least several weeks if the Zoning Board of Appeals is involved. But I cannot say definitively just how long it will take, because that does depend on factors that I do not have control over.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for providing the detailed background information, Ms. Hutchings. You know, I am, for the record, I am sensitive to the delays that would occur for this project. However, I also recognize the what I consider to be a cautious approach that, Mr. Chair, you are advocating. Therefore, I am in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Does anybody else have any issues that they'd like to raise as it relates to this particular application? Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to state, I generally agree with your approach here. I think especially having understood the order of operations that Ms. Hutchings just walked us through, and the many different sort of detailed steps in public process that could be triggered here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none. What I would like to do as it relates to this particular application is continue it to the August 3rd meeting, which is our next meeting. I don't believe any further at this point, testimony needs to be taken either written or oral. I presume that the next time that this applicant comes before us with the new kind of loading plan that they've presented to the city, that will likely generate some additional comment. But right now, what I'd like to do is just straight up continue these folks to the August 3rd meeting. I would like to have it seconded by Amelia. And Raisa, if I could ask you to call the roll, please.
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Erin Gino,
Aye.
Shahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Thank you all. Unanimous vote. This item is continued until August 3rd. The next item on the agenda, White Street has been continued, 620 has been continued. We have 16 and 20 Broadway and 366 Broadway left on our agenda. I would like to ask for 16 and 20 Medford Street to please be recognized. Now, there are two separate applications for this particular project, but they are related.
This is Raisa speaking. I do have a list of names for tonight for this particular case, and I will be unmuting them as I call their name.
Thank you.
Tanya
Well,
Courier.
well, hold on, Raisa, before you continue.
My apologies.
It's my understanding, and I don't know, let me take a quick look. It's my understanding that Councilor Scott was here at one point and would like to speak on this issue. I don't know if he is still here. If to the extent that he is still here and would like to speak on this application, I would like to recognize him first.
This is Raisa speaking. I do see JT Scott. I see Councilor Scott twice on the attendee list, so I will unmute the first one and we'll try the second one afterwards.
To the extent that either of Councilor Scott's avatars would like to speak, I will recognize them both.
I'm just moving so fast, it looks like there's two of me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate the courtesy. I do believe the board has heard pieces of this case before.
Yes, sir.
I am a little uncomfortable speaking before the applicant, obviously. But if that's the chair's preference, I'm happy to do that.
Sir, I'm not sure how your evening looks. I'm willing to recognize folks who want to speak before you. I also understand that you may have other meetings to which you need to attend, so it's always the preference of the planning board to have public officials speak as soon as they can so they can get to other matters. But if that's your preference not to do that, that's certainly a discretion.
No, I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm unaccustomed to the courtesy. I appreciate it. I'm happy to speak just from my perspective as the board counselor here. At the planning board's direction, we did have a fourth neighborhood meeting for this project. It was decently well attended. The concerns that have been raised, I think it had largely been handled by the applicant. The applicant has been very good at working with the neighbors to address issues and also addressing the concerns of the neighborhood council in terms of increasing the bedroom count in at least one of the units. And it's my understanding that they have come to an agreement with the neighborhood council in terms of a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement, if not an official community benefits agreement there. So I would just simply, through you, ask the applicant if that is indeed the case as you consider this. But from the perspective of meeting the concerns of the neighborhood and working with the neighborhood council, to my knowledge, this applicant has done everything requested and above and beyond in terms of working with the neighborhood council and neighbors I didn't hear substantial neighborhood objections to this in the neighborhood meeting process, and frankly, I feel like it did what the process was supposed to do, which is to get the neighbors' opinions on this thing and shape it to the extent that it's possible. You know, it's always frustrating when trying to balance the desires and needs of the neighborhood versus that of planning staff or mobility staff or any of the, you know, half dozen departments that end up interacting with the design of a project like this. But I can't fault the applicant at all for the way they've conducted themselves and ultimately with the proposal they have before you. So from that perspective, I'm supportive of it. And as I said, I do believe they have come to an agreement with the neighborhood council, which is something that I'm always supportive of. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council, I very much appreciate your address to the planning board and your summary of where you believe this applicant's proposal lands with the neighborhood. It's always incredibly welcome to us, so thank you. What I would like to do now is have the applicant themselves be unmuted, their representatives and their presentation folks, and make any further presentation to the board that they think is appropriate. We've certainly taken testimony on this. We have discussed this agenda item, so I would like to hear what they say.
This is Raisa speaking. I do see Brian McGrail's hand raised. I believe he's the attorney for the night. Brian, you have been unmuted.
Thank you, Raisa. Can the board hear me, Mr. Chair? Oh, great. Thank you very much. For the record, Attorney Brian McGrail with offices at 607 North Avenue in Wakefield, Massachusetts, representing the applicant, Somerville Living LLC. We were last before your board on June 1 of this year. As the board is aware, and as it was stated, this is two related applications. It's a major amendment to a previous approved special permit and also a new special permit related to parking relief to address proposed changes to the project that has already been approved. Our team tonight consists of myself, Hugo DiBiase is here as owner on behalf of Somerville Living LLC. Tanya Carrier is our architect with CALSA Design and will do a presentation. We also have Stephen Zaitz, who was our traffic civil engineer with GM2. And lastly, Erin Hosseini Fitch, who is our landscape architect with Verdant Landscape Architect. When we were last before your board on June 1, we were very much encouraged to conduct another neighborhood meeting, which we were very agreeable to. Councilor Scott, as you've already heard from, was kind enough to coordinate that hearing, that meeting, I should say. We very much appreciate his time and effort in doing that. The meeting was hosted by him on June 28th, started at about 6 p.m. and evidently I've been informed that it lasted for about an hour and a half. And as Councilor Scott had mentioned, there was a good attendance. My client counted as approximately 20 neighborhood participants that actually attended that meeting. So it was very worthwhile and well called for by your board. Since that meeting, or prior to that meeting, in conjunction with that meeting, and perhaps after, my client has also had meetings, as Councilor Scott mentioned, with Union Square Neighborhood Council. They've met with them approximately 3 times since your last meeting on June 1. And to confirm Councilor Scott's comment, or I guess question, my client has come to an agreement with the Union Square Neighborhood Council, and I'm sure you'll hear from them tonight in that regard. And we're hoping that they will support the project at this point. So all of those meetings and the time spent since June 1 has been very productive, has resulted in benefits to the city, to the neighborhood, and my client is comfortable where the project stands. So with that said, Mr. Chair, if I can hand it over to Tanya Carrier, and she has a presentation to give the board some updates on the project, where it is now. A lot of that is a result of the neighborhood meeting and discussions with Union Square Neighborhood Council.
This is Raisa speaking. Tanya, I am making you into a presenter so you can share your screen.
And for the record, the chair would welcome any further discussion and presentation by the applicant.
Great, thank you, Brian. This is Tanya Carrier from Culsa Design. So I believe I've pulled up the screen for you all. So I'll go through briefly, very brief overview, but mostly focusing on the changes since the last meeting. So since our last meeting, as Brian mentioned, we did have our fourth neighborhood meeting on 6/28, and it was quite productive. And what you'll see here is some of the outcome of that meeting. And we are still seeking the major amendment and also the special permit for reduction of parking spaces. And just a recap of our site at 16-20 Medford Street, fronting along Medford Street, South Street, Bedford Street, and Warren Street. And our proposed aerial view. One of the smaller modifications we made was to the roof here, which you can see. We incorporated the selected mechanical equipment to go with the central system, so that added more roof area since there are less mechanical units, and kind of reorganized the green roof area. And here's a summary of our design revisions from our original proposal and also from what you saw at the last planning board meeting. So our original proposal did have 41 units. Last time we were proposing 51 units, and now we're down to 50. And the reason we did that reduction was we were able to accommodate 2 additional 2-bedroom units within the same design. So we replaced one of the studios and 2 of the 1-bedroom units with 2 2-bedroom units. We are still proposing the net zero ready construction and are planning to seek the actual certification for passive house. And just a reminder, our site would allow up to 58 units on site. We are proposing 50 to have a different unit mix than all studios. We wanted to have 1-bedrooms, 2-bedrooms, and 3-bedroom units. And we are proposing 10 affordable dwelling units. This was an increase of 2 affordable from our original proposal. We will still be doing LEED Platinum certifiable, and we are still planning to do rental units. And from our original proposal, we did remove the garage, which decreased from 43 spaces to 12 spaces. So no underground garage, but we do have some surface parking, which is kind of concealed from the public view. And we did change one of the cladding materials. And one of the changes of removing the garage underground was that we were able to accommodate a full-size bike room at grade with 3 exit points from different locations on the site. So just a reminder, our original proposal showing that garage ramp. And our current proposal, this really hasn't changed since our last meeting, but just as a recap, we now have that bike room along the rear of the property, which can be accessed from Warren Street, Bedford Street, and from the main lobby, which comes from Medford and South Streets at the center point there. We do have 52 bike spaces, 51 long-term in that bike room, and then 1 in the commercial space. And we have a mixture of some oversized spaces for larger bikes with cargo gear or other attachments. And we are still proposing our commercial space fronting along Medford Street and some amenity spaces along South Street. And our 12 parking spaces, which would be accessed from Bedford Street. Still also proposing those short-term drop-off spaces as well as ride share spaces there. In our zoning chart, we do comply with all zoning requirements except for the, we do require the special permit for household living use, and we are seeking the special permit for reduced parking. And here is just a visual showing the second map here, showing we are just outside of the walk shed. Directly across the street would be within the half-mile walk shed area. And just to recap, this was our former proposal with the garage and 41 apartments. And what we are here tonight, so this was where you can see one of the changes we made as an outcome of some of your comments last time and abutters comments in wanting more 2-bedroom units. So we were able to add 2 additional 2-bedroom units on the 4th floor in the corners. And that replaced 3 of the smaller units. So currently we are at 50 units, 10 studio units, 28 1-bedrooms, 10 2-bedrooms, and we still do have the 2 3-bedroom units. We kept those as well. And here you can see our new roof plan, still having a green roof and roof deck, just reducing the mechanical areas and separating them into 2 to be more efficient building layout. And just a brief summary showing our unit count and how it's changed throughout the project. So our current proposal, I already went over the actual count, but our studio reduction is about 9%, 1 bedroom 6.7%, and we increased the 2 bedrooms, the main change, by 25% since our last proposal to you guys. And our total people count in the building, you know, per bedroom is relatively the same. It increased by 1 with the change, and total bedroom count increased by 1 as well. And the exterior, I have not changed this since the last time, so I believe it's mostly the same crew, so I won't go into detail, but we did work closely with the UDC, and we broke up the massing with different bays and balconies, as well as different durable masonry treatments along the entire ground floor and some of the upper levels. And we have kind of a 2 facade scheme per the zoning ordinance. And just a recap of the other elevation views. And the rear elevation, which we worked closely with the planning board on the original approval. A few additional views from Warren Street. And then from Bedford Street, where you can see the parking entry off of the center of Bedford Street there. And with that, I'll turn it over to Erin from Verdant Landscape Architecture to briefly go through the landscape design and changes.
Thank you, Tanya. Erin Hosseini Fitch from Verdant Landscape Architecture. So the at-grade landscape has not changed since the last planning board review, but I will just briefly go over it. The proposed public sidewalk is being extended to 12 feet width, consisting of an 8-foot width concrete right-of-way and a 4-foot width tree planting and furnishing zone. This includes the addition of 12 new street trees total along all 4 streets, Medford, South Bedford, and Warren, where there are none currently existing today. And then the rear landscape consists of previous paved egress walks, a dog run, and buffer plantings along the rear property line. And this includes 11 upright deciduous trees to help buffer views of the new development. And the project includes predominantly drought-tolerant native plantings to encourage biodiversity. Next slide. So at the roof deck level and a mini exterior deck for residents, an extensive greener system are being proposed. The plant selections up here are also predominantly native species with accent perennials woven into the sedum green roof. And then the recent updates to the landscape roof plan are limited to the adjusted layout of the green roof system to accommodate the new layout for the mechanical equipment. The approximate extent of the sedum green roof has remained roughly the same as before, though. Next slide. And then as before and as noted here, the project does currently meet and exceed the required green score for the MR4 zoning district, exceeding the 0.25 score. And I can gladly answer any questions at the end. Now for our traffic engineer, Stephen. Thank you.
Good evening, planning board members. My name is Stefan Zaitz from GM2 Associates, and we covered the traffic portion of this project. Before I started, one thing I wanted to explain is the transit update and questions from the last planning board meeting regarding how the proposed MBTA bus network is going to impact the area. Existing right now within our quarter-mile radius, we have 4 bus routes, 69, 80, 87, and 88. The 3 bus routes within the 80s all serve similar areas, from Arlington Center and Clarendon Hills to Lechmere Station, and 69 provides service from Harvard Square to Lechmere as well. Within the half-mile radius existing, we also have several other routes, which is 85, 83, 91, and CT2. With this proposed MBTA bus route, I would say that things are largely unchanged within the quarter-mile radius. Route 69 will pretty much remain in service.
Can I ask you for a second?
Yes, sorry.
You have a proposed bus route.
Sorry?
When you mentioned a proposed bus route, what do you mean? Is it does not yet exist in the MBTA system?
Yes, so some of the routes that are within the bus route network are being proposed routes. They're kind of modifications from existing routes.
Is there a commitment to the MBTA and by the MBTA to actually make these things plausible?
The MBTA did include a timeline within this, and their timeline is they're estimating within 5 years, by 2028, they want to implement some of these changes.
Okay, so your traffic and mobility plan is subject to something that the MBTA has tried to plan out in a hypothetical over the next 5 years. Is that what I understand?
So just to continue finishing the explanation, the proposed network is not providing any changes to Route 69. 80, 87, and 88 are being consolidated into one bus route, which will be 87. Both of these routes, 69 and 87, will be provided with the same bus stops within our quarter-mile radius.
Sir, can I clarify? My question was, are the bus routes upon which you're relying not yet defined by the MBTA as something that is actually going to happen?
This plan that the MBTA has proposed, they have approved this plan. And by my understanding, they are moving forward to implement this.
Okay, could I just elucidate to you that the MBTA planned and promised the MBTA Green Line in 1995? What I'm saying is I think your reliance on future MBTA plans may or may not be exactly what you would hope it to be. Going forward in trying to convince this member of this board that something is going to happen.
Oh, okay, I understand. I just, for this part, I simply wanted to explain kind of what some of these changes might possibly look like within the area. That's all. This is purely informational. Apologies.
I appreciate that. At some point, I also may be 6'5", which would be great, but thank you.
And Tanya, if you can continue. So lastly, you know, as part of the parking relief, we did a parking study for the project. The mobility division defined a quarter-mile radius adjacent to the site, which stretches from Columbia Street to Warren Street, in which case we basically analyzed and observed what's happening within these streets. What we did is we observed the total number of cars on each street during the late evening, early morning, and midday in March of this year. This is really telling us how many residents are parking in the area, as well as how this area is maybe commercial or business oriented. Our findings from this is we found that only 35% of the spaces were used overnight, which meant that approximately 75 spaces were open within this area. By early morning, 63% of the network was being used, And we observed that was due to some workers already arriving at surrounding work areas, Boynton Yards mainly. And by midday, there was very little capacity left. About 90% of the parking was utilized. What's this really telling us is that the parking is available for residents during the evening and that most of the use in this area is from business and work related. What this also means is that a lot of this development's impacts are going to be due to short-term usage, if there was being the availability. We are proposing to mitigate a lot of these impacts by providing the 3 short-term spaces and 2 loading zone and rideshare spaces within the garage that is shown in the image with the blue spaces and the red spaces. We're also going to be showing signage and wayfinding along Bedford Street and Medford Street, so as people are not stopping on those roads and congesting the area. And some commentary from the neighbors, a lot of concerns about on-street parking. Mobility is recommending a condition be put in place that would prohibit any of these residents from participating in residential parking permits. So all in all, with the availability of the existing parking in the area, as well as the mitigation measures that we're putting in place, we believe that this development is going to have minimal impacts to the on-street parking network. And that's all, Tanya. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Just to circle back briefly on the bike routes, was it also analyzed under the current routes? Just to clarify for the board, Stefan?
The bike routes within, no, most of those are unchanged. Those weren't really analyzed in any additional manner.
Okay, so most of the bike routes were unchanged. There were just a few adjustments that you were pointing out.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you. So unless Brian or Ugo have any further remarks, we can turn it over.
If I may, Mr. Chair, this is Ugo DiBiase, part of the ownership group. I'd just like to provide a little bit of clarification. I think at our last meeting on June 1st, a member of the board asked us to look into the proposed future MBTA bus routes. And we were simply just wanting to provide that information that we did look into it, but our mobility package for this project that was submitted and reviewed and approved by Mobility is based off of the current conditions of what is in place. But I think we just were looking at it from a future condition. If things were to change, are we also future proofing per se the building in this special permit process? So I hope that provides some more clarity around that item.
Ugo, that does. Thank you very much for weighing in on that. I'm going to have some additional questions on the mobility issues and the parking issues in a bit. But what I'd like to do first, unless you and your team have anything further that you'd like to add, which I think you may not, but you're certainly welcome to weigh in, is I would like to open it up to members of the planning board for our discussion and questions that you can answer, comments, things like that. So what I'd like to do first, before I give you my thoughts, is to see where my colleagues land.
This is Raisa speaking. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to inform the board and yourself that Councillor Scott has raised his hand again and would like to speak.
Oh, for sure. Councilor Scott, you're more than welcome to join the conversation, sir.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the presentation here, and honestly, I think it just drives home again how much this applicant has really listened to and accommodated this process. I'll be honest with you, over the last couple decades, I've seen some far less engaged processes, let's say. And between their work with the neighborhood council, their work to change, decrease the number of units and accommodate the extra bedroom counts that people have been looking for, the removal of all the underground parking, which is frankly a boon, regardless of whether the MBTA bus network plan shakes out the way that they think or not. This is completely in alignment with everything that we've been looking to make happen here in Ward 2. It's been a long haul. It's been a couple of years working on this development, and just speaking as the counselor, I am, and as a neighbor, I am fully supportive of approving this project this evening, and again, grateful both for the board's consideration and also for Mr. DiBiase and his team's method of engaging with the neighborhood. So not to put too fine a point on it, but I felt like I had given a good summary of the process last time, and I just wanted to make sure it was unequivocal that I support approving this. Thank you.
Councilor Scott, very much appreciated. Thank you again for weighing in. With the discussion with the applicant and the commentary by the counselor, I would certainly welcome my fellow board members to weigh in on any comments, questions, discussion points that they have. I have a few, but I'd like to hear where your heads are at. Yes, I see Amelia. Amelia, so here's the problem, right? So as you have seen when you were the chair, sometimes when you maximize the presentation, everybody's box gets really small. So I'm gonna slightly minimize the applicant's presentation so I can see my board members a little clearer. But yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good project. I think it was a good project the first time we saw it. And I think that the modifications that have been made in response to the additional public comment most recently are also improvement. And I certainly appreciate the applicant team's responsiveness to sort of our request for them to hold that additional public meeting, the good faith effort that appears to have been made based on the turnout and the length of the meeting that was described, and Councilor Scott's sort of confirmation that folks are being heard and that there's been engagement. So I feel very positively about moving forward with this project at this point. Thank you.
Michelle, I see Erin's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to sort of agree with all of Vice Chair Aboff's comments here. A strong project. I think the community engagement has made it a stronger project, especially considering it's a rental project. And it's gratifying to see that there does appear to be a strong commitment to the neighborhood. So that's definitely a pro in my book. The only maybe lingering concern I have is more on possibly the city administrative side around the parking permit advertisement and situation. I think I've over the last couple months have heard a couple scenarios of people renting apartments in these new buildings that don't allow for parking permits, and their realtor told them, oh yeah, you can totally get a permit from the city, and then you can't, which is, I think, a third-party realtor probably doing this, and I'm not entirely sure what conditions that are reasonable that we could apply to try and mitigate that. But to whatever extent possible, I would just like to emphasize, us putting these conditions to say these applicants can't have on-street permits, to try and make that as fair as possible and as clear as possible to potential renters of these buildings. That would be sort of my only hesitation, but I don't think it sort of negates an otherwise strong project. It's more of a process type concern. Thank you.
Erin, you are speaking my language. Let's have this discussion in a minute once I clear out anyone else who may or may not want to speak on this particular application. I see Michael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to echo my support for this project as well and highlight my my appreciation for the community engagement. And it obviously does show to have a city councilor be so supportive in the project. I also would like to highlight my excitement to see cargo bike parking spaces. Obviously, as we start to reduce the amount of car parking, we're going to have more and more people reliant on bicycles. And that means taking groceries, and that means taking kids around. And especially with the volume of 2 and 3 bedrooms here, I do think it's possible this building could host families. So I also want to kind of emphasize my support for that as well. That's all I got. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? See, no, I'm gonna weigh in for a hot minute. I want to echo my colleagues' praise for this application, because I also have praise for this application. I think you have worked well, certainly better than some other applicants that I've seen over my time, on where we as a planning board, but certainly the neighborhood stands on what the application should look like, how it should function with the neighborhood. I think it speaks highly that you've gotten some pretty decent testimony and support by neighborhood folks as well as the council. I think that also certainly lends some credibility to the legitimacy of what you've presented to the planning board. I want to ask, so obviously what I was kind of raising before is the hypothetical transit issues related to this particular application, right? The MBTA certainly hasn't made its decisions known or permanent or has actually engaged in them. So what we're looking at is somewhat of a hypothetical and speculation on what transit could look like around this development, which is fine. We've done it before. I still with you. I just think I kicked out. Sorry. My question to you is this: is your request for parking relief because you're outside of a transit zone? You're required to have 40 some odd spots and you're looking for 12. That's okay with me as one member of this board. This city has made a priority in trying to reduce the number of cars in the city, a number of vehicles that are tied to residential units. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know if the numbers have actually borne out the strategy that we've had over the last couple of years. We still have about 60% of all residents of the city. We have about 79,000 residents in the city and $1.9 million in residential parking permits that are guaranteed as revenue, which works out to about 50,000 residential permits for 80,000 residents. So I don't think the strategy that the city has worked out over the last couple of years has necessarily worked the way it wanted, but irrespective. My question to the applicant is this: what we do in transit zones is when an applicant wants to have, in some cases, zero parking, what the planning board has done for years before the city council has adopted it, the planning board used it as a wayfind, is we say, that's great, you can do that. None of your residents get residential parking stickers because you've indicated that none of your folks need them. In this circumstance, you were otherwise obligated to provide, I think, 43 residential parking spaces, and you want to provide 12. That's okay to me. My question is this, and my proposal to my board members is this: if we actually want to stand by what this applicant thinks is going to be the need for this particular development, and what the city has proposed as an incentive to reduce, cars in the city, if this applicant is willing to accept a condition that would restrict their residents to having 12 residential parking stickers for their entire building. That's something that I'm certainly willing to go forward on. Because I actually like to have people walk the walk instead of just talk the talk. Because if this applicant thinks that this is what they need, and mobility thinks that this is perfectly fine, I'm willing to go forward with that. But what I don't want to do is take 30 additional vehicles on this particular application, because the planning board deals with many, many applications throughout the course of its year. I don't want to take these 30 and another application's 30 and another application's 30 and say, we're pretending you don't need them, and yet they still exist. So I'm wondering if this particular applicant is willing to accept and walk the walk on saying, we only need 12, we're only going to give people 12. So I'd like to have some discussion on the planning board of whether this is something that we're willing to continue our position on in non-transit zones, and whether this is something this particular applicant is willing to walk the walk on as something that they've represented to us as to what they actually need. I see Amelia's hand.
Mr. Chair, I don't think I would agree that that should be the board's position sort of universally in non-transit zones. I think there is still an element of geography and connectivity and proximity that in my mind would be very relevant to the appropriateness of that condition. In this case, I do agree with you, but as sort of a broader point, I don't think it is always applicable.
For sure. I'm always willing to have that discussion. That is not part of the code. That is certainly something that we can condition on this particular application based on its proximity and based on the applicant's, in my opinion, reliance on a transit network that may or may not exist. I'm willing to meet the applicant where they are. Does anybody else have any comments or questions on my proposed condition? I see Aaron's hand.
I guess I would be broadly supportive of that. And I guess based on how many times this applicant has come back and forth and how many staff memos we've had, I feel like I saw a condition for parking permits at one point. And I guess I was operating under the circumstance that was sort of just on the table.
Aaron, I think that makes a lot of sense. Can I clarify with staff, what are the parking conditions that are provided in this particular application in the latest go around? Is this already?
Hello, Chair Capuano. Thank you so much for the ability to speak through you. Basically, staff's stance on the proposed conditions have not changed since our first staff memo for the, which I believe was dated May 25th. Don't quote me on that. But our recommendation to, or I should say mobility staff's recommendation to condition the project to prohibit any sort of participation in the Somerville's on-street parking program to be applied still stands.
So your recommendation is what I thought it was, to restrict it to the 12 that they're proposing.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
I wanted to make sure that it was still a position of staff. That is going to likely be my position going forward in other applications where applicants are requesting parking relief. So I hope staff mirrors its position with this particular application with others going forward, because as I've said for years, and I certainly am thankful that the City Council has adopted the Planning Board's position on, if you want to talk the talk, you should walk the walk on some of these things. So I'm very happy that that is still the staff's position, that is still the staff's proposed condition. And I would like to see it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to make sure that I'm, sort of keeping the numbers in my head, what we're talking about is there's the on-site parking in the covered garage. That is what it is. It's sort of separate. And then there would be the no eligibility for the market rate units, but per sort of the standard application of the no eligibility of the on-street parking applies for market rate units, but is not necessarily the standard for ADUs. So the on-street parking permit participation would be accessible or would be available for the affordable units, not for the market rate units. And then there would be the sort of separate garage situation that's, however the building handles it. Am I understanding this correctly? I guess that's a question for staff. So, Mr. Chair, I think Andrew has his hand raised.
I'm certainly welcoming any staff that can address the issue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And for the record, Andrew Gravinsky, planner with Planning Preservation and Zoning. I missed that earlier. Member Gino, to answer your question, basically, you are correct. The only way a permit can be sought is if a person obtains a waiver from the housing division to prove that they're going to be residing in an affordable dwelling unit or ADA sign off for their vehicle only. Those are the paths one can take in this situation.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and thank you for the clarification. I just want to make sure we're talking about the right numbers in the right scenario. So
yes, and again, that's outside the parking that's on site. That's on-street parking I'm referring to.
Exactly. The private on-site parking, I totally understand, is outside of that purview. So I guess with that clarification, I'm definitely supportive of that condition, and makes me support the project. And I think, as Member McNeely also mentioned, the cargo bike parking, I think, mitigates a lot of the pain of not having an on-street parking. I can certainly say experientially there's been a pretty big uptick in minivan bikes, as it were. So thank you for the clarification, Mr. Gravinsky. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Anytime. Anybody else? Okay. Well, in that case, we have two, I believe, votes that need to be taken on this particular application. And let me scroll down to my cheat sheet to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So, following public testimony, review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the zoning ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions outlined in the in staff memorandum, the major amendment to a previously approved general building in the MR4 zoning district, which required site plan approval and a special permit for household living, seconded by Amelia. Riza, could I ask you to please call the roll?
This is Riza speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Aaron Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Unanimous vote on that particular vote. We have a second vote for the special permit. Following public testimony and review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by our zoning ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions outlined in the staff memorandum, the special permit for parking relief and the minimum parking requirements in the MR4 zoning district, seconded by Amelia. Risa?
This is Risa speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Shahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Wonderful. We have a unanimous vote on that one as well. Good luck and thank you to the applicant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the board, for all your time and consideration.
Certain. And thank you for your work with us.
Thank you.
We have, I believe, one more item that we need to bring up. What I'd like to do real quickly is take a very brief 5-minute recess before we open up the case on Broadway, which will need to be read into the record. So we will reconvene at 7:40, please. 7:24. Rice, are you there?
This is Raisa speaking. I am here.
Okay, at 7:24, the planning board is back in session. I would like to ask the clerk of the planning board to please read into the record the notice of public hearing for 366 Broadway.
Of course, weird time to get some carrot. Anyway, reading into the record, 366 Broadway, PNZ 21175, 60 Broadway, Somerville LLC proposes to develop a 4-story LEED Gold and Net Zero ready apartment building and establish a household living principal use for 58 dwelling units in the Mid-Rise 4 zoning district, which requires site plan approval and 1 special permit for household living.
Thank you so much. If we could please rise to recognize the applicant and their team for a presentation.
This is Raisa speaking. I do see a hand raised. Nicholas Azula, you have been unmuted. Will you be the presenter tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Raise a no. Evan Stellman from KDI will be the presenter tonight. I am the attorney for the project.
This is Raisa speaking. Evan, you have been made into a presenter. You should be able to share your screen.
Perfect. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
And may I remind any and all presenters to please identify themselves and their address for the record, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Attorney Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, and Miller, 28 State Street, Suite 802 in Boston, Massachusetts. With me tonight, if you go to the next slide, Evan, when you can, it does identify the rest of our team, Mr. Chair. Evan Stellman is with Calsa Design, Inc. He is the architect on the project, as well as Edward Doherty from 366 Broadway, Somerville LLC, who is the project developer. And you can see the rest of our team on the screen here as well. Next slide. Yes, sir.
Council, to the extent that anyone else besides Mr. Stellman who will be presenting, I will just ask them to present themselves for the record.
Understood. Yes, sir. I do not believe that will be the case, but that is understood, and we will make sure that is the case. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next slide, Evan. Just to give a very quick background on the developer, he has developed in this area before and developed other similar sized buildings. You can see here, this is one in Cambridge at 95 Fawcett Street. Next slide, Evan. We'll go through these slides quickly, Mr. Chair. I know it's been a long night already. Again, just showing some reference for his previous development in the greater Boston area. Next slide. This is just the zoning map, Mr. Chair, just to orient everybody. 366 Broadway, you can see there circled. It's approximately 13,495 square feet in land area. It is located in the MR4 zoning subdistrict under the zoning ordinance, which you can see here. Next slide, Evan. This is the walkshed map. So the site is located within a half-mile walkshed zone. So we are presenting a project tonight in line with the fact that it is a net zero building and within the walkshed. So no on-site parking will be proposed, which you will see in a minute. Next slide. And this is just to show that this area of Broadway where we are at is not considered a pedestrian street. Next slide, Evan. And again, just Evan will take over from here, Mr. Chair, but this is located along the corner on Broadway at the corner of Thurston Street next to Sycamore Street, which you can see here. This is an existing, it's the Winter Hill Professional Building. It's a 2-story brick office building. It includes medical, dentistry, and other professional office spaces. And you can see the context here on Broadway. Next slide, Evan. And the next few slides, Evan, you can go through fairly quickly, but these just show the existing conditions, Mr. Chair and members of the board. This is existing condition from the front. This is down Broadway. This is the other side of Broadway. Next slide. This is coming up Thurston Street. As you can see, there is Thurston does have an incline as it proceeds up towards our site and towards Broadway, which we take advantage of at the grade change as part of the project. Next slide. This is just showing the adjacent property line and the building to the rear of us, which is on Thurston Street 108, I believe 108, 110, 112 Thurston Street. Next slide, Evan. Again, just some more existing conditions as you go down Thurston from the corner where we are at. Next slide, Evan. This is up a little bit further up the street at the corner of Sycamore, and you can see our building at the bottom left. Next slide, Evan. And again, just some more context across the street. I believe this might be the last one on the context, Evan. Next slide. And again, one more across the street from us on Broadway.
Yeah,
Next slide. Go ahead, Evan. Yep.
Yeah, just a few more. This is a catty corner from Broadway and Thurston, 3-story brick structure. And then the last contact is a 5-story brick structure that's also catty corner at the corner of Broadway and Sycamore. Just to go over a project summary, this is a new construction of a 4-story apartment building. We will have a total of 58 residential units. Of that, 20% will be affordable units, including 3 3-bedroom units. Some amenities that we're proposing is a community room, remote work room, fitness room, package room, balconies for about 30% of the units, and then a common roof deck with green. This project does include 58 interior bicycle parking spaces with direct street access, which includes 6 oversized bicycle parking spaces. The gross floor area is proposed to be a little under 50,000. We're at 49,400 square feet. We're designing to be a net zero ready and a LEED Gold viable building. Our proposed unit mix, 57% of the units are going to be studio units. That translates to 33. Of that, 5 of those will be studios. 27% of the units are 1-bedroom. That would be 16 units. Of that, 2 would be affordable. 9% of the units are 2-bedrooms. That's 5 units, and of that, 1 will be affordable. And 7% are 3-bedroom units, which is a total of 4 units. 3 of those will be affordable.
So before you proceed, I'm going to ask you the question that I asked of the previous applicant that I think you heard and who presented with an additional neighborhood meeting. Have you had a number of neighborhood meetings, and what has the sentiment of the neighborhood been on this proposed unit mix? Because the last presentation that we had, we asked them to go back and rediscuss with the neighborhood what their proposed unit mix was, and they changed it to be more family-sized units than what they had prior. And with 7 and 9% being 2 and 3-bedroom units, and 57% being studios, that may not be where the neighborhood wants to be, but I also want to know what the discussion has been with the neighborhood and with the counselor.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Attorney Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, Miller again. Thank you. We did have 2 public neighborhood meetings as required. They were pretty well attended. We had, I think, 18 or so on the first meeting and 12 or 14 on the second meeting. I don't recall there being much of a discussion on the unit mix. There was some discussion about the parking in the no on-site parking. However, it was not a necessarily a discussion in opposition. There was both sides, and I think the unit mix was received well, mostly because the fact that there is no proposed parking. So having units of a smaller size at this location without parking was seen as a positive, whereas if we were not proposing parking and we had predominantly 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, my recollection was that folks would have been a little bit more uneasy about the parking. You know, I don't want to speak for Councilor Clam. I don't know if he is on right now, but the overall process was pretty well. It went pretty well. You know, there were the typical comments, and some were in opposition to each other for the parking and other things of that nature. But I'll let Evan, our architect, answer if he has a different recollection. But my recollection was that the unit mix was well received in tandem with the no on-site parking, as well as the understanding that this is, you know, a development without residential displacement. And the idea was, and our thought was, that this would not maybe be an area that would be necessarily a good location for larger size units, and that perhaps having this unit mix, as you had mentioned, be here, that it would potentially take the burden off some of the other larger size units in the vicinity, in the neighborhood, where people were renting larger family size units with 2 and 3 roommates, and that they could now possibly live here instead, thereby freeing up some of that larger housing stock in the neighborhood. That was our position during the presentations. I don't recall there being anything necessarily over the top in opposition to the unit mix. But I would, if you may, Mr. Chair, I would love Mr. Stellman to just verify that, because the meetings were a little bit ago. Evan, do you remember anything different? That was my recollection.
No, I have the same recollection as you. It was the butters were pretty amenable to the unit mix.
I appreciate that. As it relates to, and I don't mean to completely disrupt your presentation, but you did raise it just in your response to my question. Your indication there would be no parking, as it's my understanding, and tell me if it's yours as well, that there is a condition or proposed condition that because there is no parking that's going to be provided on site, that you will not get residential parking stickers. That's a pretty standard condition of the planning board. Is that still your understanding?
Yes, sir. Attorney Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, and Miller. Yes, sir, that is the case, Mr. Chair. We will be required to enter into a mobility management plan with the mobility division. We understand this would be a condition on the project, as well as bike parking, transit contributions, things of that nature. So yes, and I believe that, you know, you bring up a great point. I also think that alleviated some of the parking concerns in unit size concerns as well during the public meeting process, was that exact. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you again. Just because, you know, I happen to be on the planning board and read these things in advance doesn't necessarily mean the public does as well. So I think it's beneficial to be able to explain to anybody that might be in attendance what it is that we really are looking at, because not everybody has that freedom of time, or that obligation of time. So I appreciate your response to my questions, and I'll let you get back to it. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Evan, do you want to go through the rest?
Sure. Evan from PDA for the record. Just to review the zoning summary, we are in front of you because we are required to go for a site plan review for the building type, and we're going for a special permit for the household living use. We did have a number of outreach meetings starting January 31st, 2022 with our first neighborhood meeting. We then moved on to the Urban Design Commission on April 12th and May 24th of 2022, and had a second neighborhood meeting June 30th, 2022. This is our first planning board hearing. I'm sorry, the date is wrong on this slide. We were originally supposed to go that date, but we're continued. Moving on to the drawings. At this point, I'll turn it over to Aaron Hassani-Fitch from Verdant to review the landscape site plan.
Thank you, Evan. Erin Hosseini Fitch from Verdant Landscape Architecture, the landscape architect on the project. I'll just briefly review the landscape design. So looking first at the at-grade landscape as shown on our plan here, we are proposing various improvements to the public realm. There are currently only 2 existing small street trees around our site, one of which that has been damaged and is in poor condition. We are proposing to replace the existing tree noted, as well as add an additional 3 new street trees. The existing sidewalk is to extend to a total 12-foot width, consisting of an 8-foot width concrete right-of-way and a 4-foot width furnishing zone. The furnishing zone itself consists of pervious unit paving, 4x9 tree walls with protective tree fencing, and visitor bike racks. Along the southern property line, a pervious paver egress walk creates direct access from interior common corridor to Thurston Street sidewalk. The remaining rear and side yard zones consist of predominantly native buffer plantings, including 8 new upright growing deciduous trees. Next slide. This sheet highlights the improvements to the public realm, as I just mentioned. Also shown here are plantings at the frontage zone along Broadway, creating year-round interest at the back of the sidewalk. Next slide. And as noted here, the project has met and exceeded the 0.25 required green score for the MR4 zoning district. Landscape details to support the score have been provided in the complete submission package for reference. And here you can also see that the project includes a roof deck. This will be discussed shortly. And back to our architect, Evan. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. For the record, Evan from KDI. Just to review the site plan and zoning chart, the site plan at the top right on all of these sheets, Broadway will be at the bottom of the sheet and Thurston will be on the left side. So I'll just, if you can see my mouse, the primary entrance to the building is right in the middle of Broadway here. As Erin mentioned, we have a secondary entrance at the rear at the basement level. And as the grade slopes down on Thurston Street, there's a 3rd entrance to the basement, which would be right at this south corner of the structure here. I'm not going to review the entire zoning chart, but we are intending to comply with all of the relevant zoning parameters other than the special permit required. I'll quickly walk through the floor plans and then we'll move on to the elevations. So as I mentioned, the primary entry is off of Broadway here. At this first floor level, there's 13 units, and this is a mix of studio units highlighted in yellow, 1-bedroom units highlighted in orange, 2-bedroom units, which are red, and then 3-bedroom units, which are dark red. Moving down to the basement level, this level is accessed via an elevator, the 2 stairs, and then there's a door at the south portion of the site, which is at grade at the basement level. This is where all the amenities are going to occur. So we have 2 large amenity spaces and as well as bike parking, which can roll right in off of Thurston Street. Moving up to the upper floors, so the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors all stack. We oriented all 15 units on all these floors around a central core. And again, this is a mix of studios, 1-bedrooms, 1 2-bedroom on each level, and 1 3-bedroom on each level. And then turn it back to Erin to run through the green roof.
Thank you, Evan. For the record, Erin Hosseini Fitch from Verdant Landscape Architecture. The common roof deck we are proposing acts as an amenity space, providing an exterior space for the residents and encourages outdoor social gatherings. Native plants with year-round interests are utilized at raised planters and help to create various zones throughout the deck. Beyond the extent of the deck itself, we are proposing an extensive green roof consisting of a blend of sedums. Next slide. And then to highlight some of the materials at the roof deck, a proposed shade structure and counter lights will help create a comfortable atmosphere for the residents to enjoy. And that covers landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. For the record, Evan Snellman from KDI. This is the exterior of the structure. I'll just walk through the exterior facades and go over our perspective views, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this view that you see here is the Broadway elevation. It is longer than 100 feet, so we did split the structure so it would read as two structures right here, oriented towards the left of this facade. I'll start from the right and move to the left. This main massing here will be a full brick, which is a red color. Between the windows, we are introducing a interesting pattern to break up the rhythm there. We do have 4 bays that break up the entire massing of this portion of the facade. And then the top floor is clad with a standing seam metal siding. As we've wrapped the corner to Thurston Street, all of these levels are opened up to balconies, and that standing seam siding comes down to the ground floor. And then where the building meets the ground on both portions of this facade, we have a really hardy cast stone water table. Wrapping the corner to Thurston Street, you can see this is where the building starts to open up to the basement level. You can see the bottom left at that south corner, we have the entry to the basement level. The primary material on this facade is a darker gray brick. And again, we introduced some standing seam patterns between the windows, both horizontally and vertically. And then the soldier course. And then the standing seam material, again, wraps the corner and goes across the top floor there. Moving on to the side elevations, this top elevation here is the right side when you view the building from Broadway. We have the standing seam material that wraps the corner. The red brick would wrap the corner as well and come about halfway down the structure. The standing seam would wrap down to the second floor, and then we introduce a cementitious cladding with reglets along the ground floor that wraps up at the corner. The bottom elevation here, Thurston Street would be on the right side. The gray brick and standing seam would wrap the corner here, and then we introduce a cementitious cladding with reglets on the ground floor, which wrap up about halfway through the building here. This is a proposed rendering from Broadway looking towards Thurston Street. This is where you can see the primarily red brick structure with the standing seam at top. And then this is a proposed rendering looking the other way. So this is Thurston Street here, this is Broadway. You can see the primarily red brick. We wrap the corner with the standing seam, and then you get the primarily gray brick material there. This is a proposed aerial view. Again, another proposed aerial from the opposite direction. And then these are just some more cartoony massing studies, so you can get a sense of the size of the structure.
Can I ask you, do you have an image of your proposed next to the two 2.5-story homes that are right next to it, and the massing that exists next to them?
I think this would be the best image for that.
That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for height. I'm looking for how it's going to necessarily impact the units that are right next to it. That's about right. So you're about a story taller than both of the buildings next to you.
That's correct.
Do you have shadow studies?
We do, yes.
Have we seen them? Can we see them?
Yep, they're next in the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the vernal equinox, which occurs March 21st. The top left one here is 9 a.m. The darker yellow shadows is what we're proposing. As you can see here, we're introducing a shadow cast to the north at 9 a.m. At noon, we're introducing a shadow that's cast onto Broadway. And at 3 p.m., we're introducing a shadow that's cast onto Thurston Street and Broadway. For the summer solstice at 9 a.m., there's a new shadow cast this way onto the abutter site. At 12 p.m., new shadows cast onto Broadway. And at 3 p.m., new shadows cast onto Thurston Street and Broadway. And 6 p.m., new shadows cast onto Thurston and Broadway as well. These are cumulative shadow studies for the summer solstice and the equinox. And then the autumnal equinox, which is September 21st, similar to the vernal equinox, shadows cast onto the abutter in the morning, onto Broadway around noon, and onto Thurston Street and Broadway at 3. And then introducing a few new shadows at 6 p.m. During this equinox. And then the winter solstice, December 21st, introducing a few new shadows on Broadway in the morning, new shadows on Broadway at noon, and then introducing a few new shadows on Broadway onto Fenwick Street. And this is showing some existing shadows from the adjacent structure here. And that is everything we have.
Thank you. I'm wondering if any members of the planning board have any comments, questions, or discussion points at this point before we open it up to public testimony. Seeing none at this time, what I'd like to do, Raisa, is open up this hearing for public testimony for anybody that wants to speak in support of the application. Please exercise the raised hand button on the go to meeting or go whatever the hell this is format, and I will call on you. Going once, going twice, seeing none. I will close that portion of the public hearing and I will open up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition to this application or otherwise express concern. Please exercise your raised hand button on this device. I see Emily Lalka. If I could please have Emily recognized.
This is Raisa speaking. Emily, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Thank you. I do want to say that I am excited to see that 3 of the 3 bedrooms are in this proposal affordable.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Please, if you can state your name and street address for the record, please.
My name is Emily Valka. I reside at 99 Thurston Street. So I'm really glad to see that 3 of the 3 bedrooms are being considered here for affordable housing. What is surprising me here is that in contrast to all of our community input for the development down the street at the Star Market site, where we did have a lot of community feedback about the size of the units being more sized for families and 2 and 3 bedrooms, that there are so many studios here, especially on a street that has a school on it, and with the Healy School being down the hill just across the crosswalk. So I'm wondering if that was taken into consideration at all by the developers, and if there is any room here to reconsider maybe an increase in the 2-bedroom size. Thank you.
Emily, thank you very much for your testimony. Just for folks that don't always come to these meetings, this is testimony. This is your opportunity to be heard, and the planning board will have an opportunity to ask questions, and the applicant will have the opportunity to respond to what they've heard during testimony. It's also the intention of the board to leave written testimony open until Friday before our next meeting to be able to gather all of the opinions of folks that want to weigh in that might not have had the opportunity to speak tonight. So the next person that I saw is Timothy Hutama. If Timothy, please be unmuted and please recognize yourself and give your name and address, please.
This is Raisa speaking. Timothy, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Yep, hi, this is Timothy Hutama. I live at 60 Cross Street East, apartment 332. I just wanted to ask, because this is a major thoroughfare, why is first floor retail not being considered?
I'm very sorry, sir. I don't know if other people were able to hear you clearly, but it was a little bit muffled to me. Were other people able to hear that testimony?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Hutama, if you could please potentially repeat your testimony. I wasn't able to hear it clearly. Is he still available?
Yes, this is Raisa speaking. I do see the question Timothy is posing on.
We cannot take things on chat as testimony that is not part of the written record. I would ask if Mr. Hutama could either please reiterate his question so the planning board could hear it. Nothing, the volume was bad, but the clarity was a little off.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is
yes,
this any
sir.
better?
Much better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm Timothy Utama. I live at 60 Cross Street East, apartment 332. I just wanted to ask, because this is a major thoroughfare, like, why is first floor retail not being considered for this location?
Thank you, sir, very much. The next person that I see is Tori Antonino. If you could please be unmuted and you know the drill. Name and address, please.
This is Raisa speaking. Tori, you are unmuted on our end. You are self-muted on your end.
Hi, my name is Tori Antonino. I'm at 65 Boston Street. I'm just, I stayed on from another meeting for that and came across this project, and I'm sort of surprised that, well, the developer applicant seemed to say that there was no conflict or conversation at the public meeting about unit size. People didn't seem to feel one way or the other about that, and I wasn't there, so I don't know the truthiness of that. So I just want to say, as I live in Union Square, and this is out of my catchment area. I'm part of the Union Square Neighborhood Council. One of the reasons why this, at the meeting, there might not have been loud advocacy for more family-sized units is because there might not be a formal neighborhood group there. And it's sort of left on the residents to cobble themselves together, which is when development is happening at such a rapid pace. It's like you blink and a new building is there the next day. So, you know, as with Hugo DiBiase, we asked him to do more family-sized units. I would just say that it has to be a standard. You have to do like at least 25% 2 to 3 bedrooms, at least do 30% 2 to 3 bedrooms. I mean, at this rate, we are displacing people, and this is not a sustainable model to keep families here, which we should want to do because that enhances our community. I have a lot of problems with this building. I just feel like a lot of developers are coming in and making a killing on us. And I question if this should even be residential. I really, going forward, I'm not sure if I'll be able to support mid-rise being residential, like even getting a permit. Why aren't we doing more commercial? We are just building luxury housing. These are luxury condos, and we can't keep up with enough affordable units. We're not providing enough. Even 20% is not enough. So I don't support this. If we need more family size housing, and there should be retail. If not, this building should be a commercial building. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Tori, thank you very much. Trying to see if there's anyone else that wants to provide testimony this evening in opposition or to express concern. And at this point, I do not. I will say this, as one member, I raised the question a little bit earlier, and then Tori, I think, hopped on it quite well, is the unit mix here. So the last couple of applications that we've had that, particularly some that you've been in attendance for when we've had these discussions, were on unit mixes, on expanding beyond just studios and 1 bedrooms and expanding towards more 2 and 3 bedrooms. with the new buildings that we've gotten in the city. And I'm wondering why you haven't thought about doing that, particularly where you are looking at building in a place that is outside of things that might be more, densely, like, Davis Square, Union Square, Teal Square, places that have like a lot more density. Winter Hills, and I grew up there. My folks are still there. It's a very neighborhood and family-based community. I'm wondering why you're looking at building such small units in an area where there are a number of schools and where there are mostly families. It's not real rental next to the T-stop. Got a couple of 25-year-olds who only ride bikes and will leave in 3 years type of neighborhood.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't. We can answer that. Attorney Nick Zazula, McDermott, Quilty, and Miller. Appreciate that question. Appreciate the input that we just heard from 3 folks who gave input. I did use the time, Mr. Chair, during the presentation to look up the meeting notes from both of our meetings just to make sure that I was not misrepresenting the comments during the meeting process. And there was one comment of, during both meetings that I have in our notes that talked about the family size units in the studios. That was it.
Can I interrupt you while you got those notes in front of you? How many folks showed up at that neighborhood meeting?
18 at the first one, Mr. Chair, and I'm seeing 14 at the second one.
That seems awfully paltry to me.
Well, I don't know if but I'll defer to your judgment, Mr. Chair. You see more of these than we do, but there was a a robust discussion. There was an active. There wasn't 18 people and 14 people who didn't ask questions. It included our rear abutter. It included some other folks on Broadway and on Thurston. So I understand your point, but I would suggest the quality.
Could I ask what your community outreach was on these meetings? Because 14 people at community meeting on a pretty sizable development on Broadway in a residential neighborhood seems like honestly pretty small to me. I can get 14 of my closest friends to tell me everything I wanted.
Understood, Mr. Chair. We did flyer. I know that staff did post in the appropriate areas. I believe that Councilor Klingon also sent out the meeting invites. He hosted the meeting with us as required, and he did send out the information to his constituents as well. So we did cover the main avenues to notice folks about the meetings.
I will tell you, Council, it's my opinion as one member. I'm broadly supportive of the project. I am less supportive of the unit mix, as I have been with previous applications that have done similar. I'll tell you right now, we're in a crisis of family-sized housing in the city. And everything that I've seen, I've been on the board now since 2008, okay? So I've been here for a while. Everybody wants to build studio and 1-bedrooms and pretend that nothing else really matters. You have done a little bit more than that, but not substantially more. What that has done in the city, in my estimation, is drive out families because you are not providing the space for families to come, stay, and grow. What I as one person would like to see, and I'm wondering if my board members would share my concern, is to see a different unit mix to expand this. The building itself is not that much of a concern to me. I think your shadow studies seem to be fine. I know it's there now. I grew up around the corner. I'm still there every couple of days. My concern is the unit mix in saying this is going to be largely a building of studios and 1-bedrooms, which to me are people that frankly don't have an investment in the city, come here for a couple of years and then leave. We need people who want to stay, raise families, invest in the community, people who are already here, who need a place to go, who want to avoid displacement because they happen to have had another kid. So that's why I've been pushing for the last couple of years, and why my board members, I think, have shared my concern on some of the unit mixes that we've seen. So that's why I have a little bit of concern about the unit mix that I see in your client's particular proposal. And I'm wondering if my board members share in seeing where we might be able to develop a couple of additional larger units, not a building full of 3-bedroom units, but certainly something that has a little bit more of a unit mix to expand what the city truly needs. The city doesn't need any more studios. We're fine with that. We've now subdivided, single family homes to 18 units. We've been doing it for 30 years. This is not what we need. What we need are more places to actually expand where folks who are not just single folks or with one partner can live and can actually, raise a family, because we do need a diversity of folks in the city. And I'm wondering if that's something that, if my board members share, we would like to see a revision of this particular unit mix for your development, which was shared by some of the folks who testified this evening. I see Amelia's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last time that this issue came up before the board, I was reluctant to sort of pursue it further because I did refer back to the zoning ordinance and the text of it and the purpose that is described for the zoning district. And on that project, the purpose sort of specified units for smaller family sizes. In this case, the MR4 district actually does specify that for apartment buildings, which is the permit being requested tonight, that the intention is for them to be sized to accommodate larger size family units. So not in a particularly discretionary way, but just referring back to the underlying intent of the zoning district in which this property is located, I agree with your assessment.
Amelia, thank you for your comment. I saw Debbie's hand next, so I will. And then Erin, I also saw yours, but you're all very small squares to me. I'm trying to make you a little bigger. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Amelia, thank you so much for pointing out that portion of this particular zoning area, because, Mr. Chair, you hit right on the head a lot of frustration that I've had in a lot of projects going up. And apologies to this particular applicant, because you may be getting some of the ire of kind of what we're seeing now, which are a lot of these, studios, which I appreciate, generate more revenue for the developer, more typically. So I would be all for trying to assess if there is the possibility of increasing, the unit sizes and reallocating the mix to align, as Amelia pointed out, with this particular MR4 district in this particular neighborhood. As one of the public members commented on, the Healy School where my kids went is, walking distance from this building. So it would be, much appreciated, I know, in that neighborhood to have larger size units that could accommodate families that do want to stay in that neighborhood. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I appreciate the comment. And I see Erin's hand re-raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I broadly support larger family sized units here. Again, reiterating that this is an apartment building in an MR4 district. The intent of that building within that zoning district is to accommodate these family sized units, which are called out in the Summer Vision 2040 plan. So I fully support the developer, or, basically what can be done to further align this project with both the intent of the building type within the zoning district and to achieve the 2040 goals of larger family size units. I will caveat this saying, I'm a person who lives in a 1-bedroom and has for the last decade. So, I can appreciate there is also some community building in 1-bedroom units. And I can appreciate this sort of economic argument that if you build more 1-bedrooms, then it will free up these larger things that are split by, you know, a couple people to reduce their rent. But getting back to, are we just building luxury units and freeing up housing stock by building more studios in 1-bedroom is precluded by, if not affordable, attainable rents on these studios and 1-bedrooms, which I don't think is in our purview as a planning board to condition. So I would go back to the intent of the apartment building in this MR4 zoning district to do what we can to get the family size units that we need as a city. And, you know, I would certainly support anything we can do to, you know, modify this project to get closer to that goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Luke's hand.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a few scattered thoughts to get them on the record. One reminder, and I think the people who are using this language didn't mean it literally, but this is, you know, new housing in a location where there is not any housing now. So anything we get here for housing is net new housing and wouldn't be displacing or, you know, driving any families out of Somerville. So it is an opportunity to think about what we want to shape on that parcel. But you know, we're fortunately in a position on this project where this is just all for the better in terms of helping address our housing crisis. Just building also on what Aaron noted, I mean, folks who live in studios and 1-bedrooms add a lot to our community. I'm someone who was a young professional living in Somerville in a small place for many years, and now I'm a entering middle-aged gulp family guy with 2 kids in Somerville schools in, you know, at Winter Hill Community School in this neighborhood. I love the mix we've got in Somerville and just want to be careful. I just, you know, if we got 50 studios and that's all it was here, you know, that still would be in my mind real net benefit to the community. Again, that's not to say I'm opposed to pushing for more bigger units too, because I like the idea of that too, but it's just all kind of in my mind like pushing for abundance of all of it. I wanted to say also, I have a close extended family member who had her rent increased very significantly in Arlington and was scrambling to find a place to live by herself and had a very hard time finding anything that she could afford, looking for studios in 1-bedrooms. So it's just anecdotally, I am experiencing it in my extended family right now, how hard it is. And then a final just thought, again, as a relatively new member still, I'm curious, and this is mostly to my colleagues, I guess, if anybody has a thought on this, the history of excluding new units like this from the ability to get a residential parking sticker when it's within a half mile of transit. What was the discussion around family-sized units and how that plays a role here? Because what's on my mind, and I think the applicant alluded to this in one of the responses earlier, it is hard for me to see a huge number of families living in an area like this without a car. Now, some are, I think, will be doing it, I guess, but it does feel a bit contradictory to push for more 2 and 3 bedrooms and then still exclude them who we hope are going to be families with multiple kids from having a car like all the rest of us are able to if we lived here before that rule was in place. So I don't know if that was studied or anything, but I just would be curious what our sense is about how many families in Somerville feel like they do need at least one car, and is it viable to be pushing for many more 2 and 3 bedrooms at the same time that we're not allowing them the right to have a parking permit, just like the rest of us incumbent residents are able to get. So that's another piece on my mind.
Look, I appreciate that. I see Michael's hand, and as soon as Michael speaks, I'm going to address some of the questions that you had based on my experience on the planning board, and maybe that might clarify a little bit of concerns that you had. Maybe not, but we'll see. But Michael, please.
Mr. Chair, actually, I would love to hear your comments first before I continue. I did have a couple of comments that riffed off of Member Schuster's statements, so I would love to get your thoughts first.
Sure. So the planning board, I think city implemented as a full part of its zoning ordinance back in like 2021, 2020, this concept of not allowing permits for new developments within transit. The planning board had been doing that for a number of years prior to that, as a way to hold developers to basically walk the walk of the talk they were talking. You know, people don't need cars, so my answer is fine, they don't get them. There has always been an exemption in the city, and I believe it's also under state law and federal law, that folks who live in designated affordable units have an exemption to that, or an opportunity to request an exemption to that requirement, which is still the case in Sumble. So what we've seen as one member of the board over the last several years since we've started implementing this is when we have requested applicants to increase the number of 2 and 3 bedroom units, those have tended to fall into their inclusionary counts. So the additional 2 and 3 bedrooms have tended to be more often than not part of the inclusionary units that are part of the new construction, which have had the opportunity to be exempted from our exclusion from residential parking stickers. So unless planning staff has numbers that are totally different from what I've seen over the last couple of years, when we have asked for additional housing stock to have 2 and 3 bedrooms, those 2 and 3 bedrooms have had the opportunity to request an exemption from that no sticker because they tend to have been inclusionary units that are not necessarily subject to state and federal law to those restrictions. If that answers your question. I don't know if what I've said is entirely accurate, but that's what I've seen on the developments that we've approved.
Yeah, really, that's really helpful context. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Michael.
Thank you. So first, for the record, I just want to say that I know I've had some dicey connections, but I've been able to hear every.
Uh-oh. You're out again. Oh no. I see you, I don't hear you.
Thing or advocating for more of that is
Michael, you're gonna have to back up about 45 seconds. I'm sorry, you froze.
okay. What was the last thing you heard? Did you hear that I had some connection issues?
Yes, and then you cut out right again. It was
perfect. All right, so I think I just want to say that I also share a sentiment that my colleagues have highlighted tonight as well about wanting to have more multi-bedroom units. So I definitely am supportive of that at a high level. And to that end, and to kind of dovetail into the discussion around, mobility and being able to move kids around the city effectively, as the applicant considers a shift towards, more 2 and 3 bedroom units, I'd also encourage them to shift some of the bicycle parking a bit as well, and maybe add on a few extra of the bigger stalls, because again, that's one of the major ways that I think families can, shuttle kids around, when they don't have cars available to them. So just want to kind of add that extra comment. But otherwise, really appreciate the comments that my colleagues have provided as well.
Thank you, Michael. So from what I gather, I see Aaron's hand. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is just really quick. While considering the bicycle stalls for larger cargo bikes, I would also just
Whoa. Get up. I was riding my single speed up Central Street in 1990. You're fine.
Sure, but you know, you get the idea.
E-bikes?
The e-bikes. I mean, single speeds as a one person, but single seats with two kids on the front. I don't know.
Where I used to ride up with Scott Hayes on my pegs on the back. No, I appreciate that, but no. To be fair to my colleagues and not just be a jerk. I do think the applicant would be well served to come back to us in a few weeks with an alternative for a modified unit mix, as well as what Michael has indicated and Aaron has shared, a potential revision of some of the bicycle parking to address the hopefully greater number of bedroom unit mixes that we might see to comport with what is more appropriate for this building's potential future, if we can do that. I would appreciate that, because I think that is something that the members of the planning board have seemed to have been something that's beneficial. And it's not certainly something that we're going to hold you to, but it's certainly something that we'd like to see as an alternative.
Mr. Chair, this is Attorney Nick Zazula. I see Member Gino. I didn't want to interrupt with any of the deliberation. We're happy to respond briefly to some of the comments, which are well placed, but I didn't want to interrupt. Just if you would let me know when we could give a brief response, we'd be happy to do it.
Your response is welcome now. I will just explain.
I apologize. I saw Member Gino's hand up. I did not want to interrupt.
I'll just say, before you start making a rebuttal, the planning board has kind of guided you and your client to a place where we might have a consensus. And I would just advise you that rebuttals per se are not always welcome, because we're trying to guide you in the place that we want to get you to vote yes. So just take that as you will.
Yes, Mr. Chair. No, I would not categorize this in any way as a rebuttal. I would categorize this as more of a response and an understanding, if that's allowed. So parking, just the rationale perspective, parking was a big factor in consideration of the unit count, with the net zero ready density bonus and the no on-site parking. So that's where that came from. This developer, as we had mentioned at the beginning, has done 2 and 3 bedroom units on main streets before in other greater Boston areas, and did not feel that they always work, that families do not necessarily rent units in these buildings. However, that we understand the comments. The thought on our end was that these units might end up being more roommates and not always families. Member Gino and others mentioned, our thought where we came from was that this would free up housing stock for family size units in other buildings. However, we can certainly go back and reevaluate the unit mix and see if there's an opportunity to add some 2-bed units. We understand and clearly understand the board's input here and your well-placed response as well and advice. And we will look at the potential of some of the bike parking to be bigger stalls and bigger bikes for larger, usage in compliance with potential for more family size units. So that just giving you the rationale and the thought process on our end and the history behind it. It was not to preclude those types of units. It was more just trying to follow the zoning as well as the specific developers' experience in these areas. And then the last thing I would just say is that, this would provide, I think, 11 or 12 affordable units at 20%. That would include 3 of the 4 3-bedroom units would be included in that under the ordinance. But again, I just will close by saying we understand the comments tonight, and we're certainly willing to go back and reevaluate the unit mix and see if there is an opportunity for us to maybe do some tweaks within the comments that we heard tonight. So again, not a rebuttal in any way, shape, or form, more just some rationale and understanding of the board's direction. So thank you for humoring my 2 minutes of time. Thank you.
For certain, I appreciate that commentary, Council, very much, and your consideration for the comments and the concerns of the board and of the public. What I'd like to do at this point, unless there's any further discussion by members of the board, which raise your hand if you have any. I see Amelia.
I have an incredibly minor comment on the facade design that I'd like to just make now, if that's all right, to avoid it being an incoming comment at a later stage. I know this has been through the UDC, and my feelings about this would absolutely not hold up a vote on this matter, but I'd just like to raise for consideration whether you've considered at all or would consider a stronger cornice line along the final story of the building on the Broadway facade. It feels like it's handled slightly better on the side street, and just wondering if that might be continued through or if that's something you'd entertain. Incredibly minor, insignificant, but I think it might improve the feeling that the building is finished at its cap.
Not insignificant in the least, Amelia, and I appreciate that comment because I do share it. I was looking kind of more at the detail, the substance of the building, and I know you did too, but I appreciate the consideration of the detail of the building as well. See Jahan too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to agree with Vice Chair Aboff's comments because I felt the same way, and I'm glad that she brought it up. And when it comes to our next meeting, when we do have the chance to interact with the applicant, I would like to hear a little bit more about the construction plan, particularly since it is a residential neighborhood, and if there's any special considerations, location being Broadway with traffic, bicyclists, pedestrians, and so forth. So this is not something that I'd like to get a response this time during this meeting / conversation, but maybe for next time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair, for bringing up, I thought, very relevant design recommendation.
So to the applicant, what I hear from the board is a potential redesign of the side of the building on Thurston, which is something that I share. I wanted to raise some of the issues about the building. I'm glad McClellan did on this side of the building as well. So we'd like to see some of that. We'd also like to see a potential alternative for a redesign of the unit mix and of the bike parking that you've proposed. And I will say, I will give whoever created the graphic design of the street, I'm going to give you a heck of a lot of props because that bus lane is not nearly that narrow, and I've seen since the bus only lane has been created about 5 years ago, I've seen about 20 people on bikes in that zone. So God bless you. Yes, Aaron.
Oh, I muted myself as opposed to unmuting. I was going to say I might have been one of those 20 people. The other thing, just for next meeting, I know it's detailed quite well in the document submitted, but the loading plan, this is a residential building. We've got deliveries, we've got with no parking, rideshare, pickup and drop off. It seemed pretty sufficient, but I think it would be helpful to, maybe go through that in a few more case studies or details, just to make sure that we haven't sort of missed any cases. Thank you.
Anybody else before I move it along to the applicant to come back to us in a few weeks with some new ideas, some alternative ideas? Seeing none, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the written record open right now until July 28th at noon to planning@somervillema.gov. Is that right, Marissa? Is that the right address?
This is Raisa speaking. That is correct.
Okay. Because our next meeting is the 3rd of August. Yes, that's right. Just making sure I got it. Now, admittedly, if the applicant does come forward with additional material or new material that would generate additional public comment, we'll take additional comment at that time, but right now, that's when the comment period will end. So what I'd like to do now is move to continue discussion of this application to August 3, seconded by Amelia. Raisa, could you call the roll, please?
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Erin Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
All this item has been continued. I want to thank you all for your attendance and your opinion and your thoughts. And what I'd like to do now is move to adjourn the planning board meeting until our reconvention on August 3rd. Seconded by Amelia. Raisa, please.
Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Erin Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Night.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good night.